This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up? Real MVPs, Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And you might be noticing something. You're like, guys, I've only seen this on the onside kick because Mark can't show up some weeks, but why am I looking at the Primetime Podcast logo? Why am I not seeing you guys on video? But we're doing a call-in podcast today. Brandon on remote for today. Lucky Brandon doesn't have to sit in the studio, so we're doing it over the phone. And before we get into everything, Brandon, before I kind of kick it off to housekeeping, the one thing I want to ask you is about this Clemson game that we saw over the past weekend, because when Trevor Lawrence got injured, I for sure thought I was going to get a game on you in the picks with Syracuse getting the win, but Clemson was able to pull it out.
Clemson was able to pull it out. I watched most of that game. It was good. It was a really good game. I think the reason why Clemson was able to win in the end, though, was because their running game was great. Their running great was great all game long, and they just got stronger as the game continued to go. ETN and others were phenomenal, and every time it seemed like they were just getting chunk yardage. And you could see that as time went on and the game went on, for Syracuse, their defense was tired, and they were out there for a really long time. While Syracuse battled and did a great job, Clemson's offense did a really good job. And defensively, don't take anything away from that Clemson defense either. They really showed up when they needed to late in the game.
No, and I can't wait I actually looked at it. In 2 weeks from today, we will have our first big board, and there's probably going to be a few of those Clemson players from their defensive side in our top 25 for our big board. But we got a jam-packed show for you guys. Going to be talking about some dark horses in the college football playoff. We're going to look at the Red River rivalry this weekend, how the Texas-Oklahoma game could affect the college football playoff. And then we're going to take a dive into the SEC. Yes, today we will be a couple of good old boys and look at Florida and if they or will they upset LSU and kind of ruin their college football playoff hopes. But before we get into everything, a little bit of housekeeping here at the beginning. Make sure to check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That's where you can help support the podcast and become a guest on the podcast each and every month. You can also go get yourself an MVP t-shirt to help support the channel and rep the MVP logo. You can get that down below in the description or at mostvaluablepodcast.com, where you can catch MVP each and every day. And then last but not least, I know, like I said, today, this week, we're going to be a couple of good old boys. We're going to talk about the SEC, but usually we're not. And make sure to go over to iTunes, if you would please, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, even if you're on YouTube. Go give us a 5-star rating and make sure to tell us why you like listening to the podcast each and every week. But Brandon, let's dive into our first topic, and we're going to look at kind of some college football playoff dark horses, because right now I kind of feel like if you asked anybody who their top four is, everyone has Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson. They might be in a different order, but everyone's got those four teams listed in their top four. Then you got some other teams. LSU is still undefeated. Notre Dame's still undefeated. Oklahoma is still undefeated. West Virginia still undefeated. We're looking at those teams outside of the consensus top four right now for who could be kind of either a spoiler or who could get themselves into the college football playoff race later in the year. I just want to get right into it. I am going to go to you. Who is the one team outside the top four right now that you're looking at to, all right, watch this team, because later in the year they could sneak themselves into the top four and into the playoff?
Well, I think that a team that you have to be looking at right now that would probably stick out to a lot of people that really necessarily isn't a dark horse. I kind of had some other teams lined up, and I still do for an actual dark horse. This isn't a dark horse. This won't surprise anybody. But Oklahoma, and I think that they definitely are right on the map after the game that they played this past weekend against Baylor, and the way that Kyler Murray played. I mean, 6 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown. He's already accounted for 23 scores, I think, total on the season between passing and rushing. He's been absolutely incredible, and this offense looks great. No one can slow them. They are just going to continue to plow through. Now, they do have a couple of games remaining on the schedule that you look at and you go, okay, well, this will be interesting. But I think that Oklahoma is one of those teams where they're not going away. They're there. They're on the fringe, and they're not going away.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I mean, that the Big 12 is a tricky one because I know that when we talk about Texas and Oklahoma later in the show, they're one where I was looking at it, and I'll actually pull up the graphic now so I could reference it. Just on the basically playoff chances, because if you win the Big 12, you'll most likely have a chance to get in. Right now, Oklahoma has a 55% chance. West Virginia, who's undefeated, has a 20% chance. Texas is at 11%. If Oklahoma wins, they jump up to a 61% chance. But if Texas wins this weekend, it's basically 23% Texas, 23% West Virginia, and that Oklahoma one falls all the way to 36. So, I mean, with me, Oklahoma they have to win out, and they're one of those teams where it's like, if you win out, just put your hopes, your chances into the hands of the committee, because there's a chance that Oklahoma goes undefeated and still misses the playoffs because like a one-loss Alabama makes the playoffs like they did last year, because Ohio State looks dominant as well. And the one thing I forgot to bring up that you wanted to mention at the beginning of this topic is kind of with Penn State. Did Penn State kind of shoot themselves in the foot and kind of give the playoffs to Oklahoma with the decision that James Franklin made this past Saturday?
Well, I think it's, a lot of people will look at that game and say, well, that 4th and 5 draw play to end it, that's what screwed them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it was not. It was the fact that they had Ohio State where they wanted them in the first half, with Ohio State really struggling to get anything going offensively, and Penn State could not put them away then. That was Penn State's problem last year.
Mm-hmm.
Penn State wasn't able to put them away. They couldn't do it. And that's why Ohio State beat them by 1 point in that game. It's back-to-back heartbreakers for Penn State against Ohio State. It's a real shame, and it's frustrating. And it's frustrating just from a fan of college football to see a team who every single year they get ready to, go up against Big Brother, and they're ready and they're prepared. And then at the very end, they find a way to just gift it to Big Brother because, well, you're older and you're bigger, and, we'll just give it to you. And that's what they seem to do. And Penn State fans should be just absolutely sick to their stomachs because this now has happened 2 times, and you're not doing yourselves any favors.
And I love how me and you before this week were like, oh, it probably won't be a 1-point game. Like, the Buckeyes will probably run away with it. And it ends up being a 1-point game. And you talk about the fans. The one thing I want to point out is one of our loyal followers and patron to Most Valuable Podcast, Jake Neverman, he's a big Penn State guy. And there was a tweet with a video that just said, like, oh, James Franklin said his program is great while Ohio State is elite. And he explains the difference. Well, Jake quoted that video and said, I mean, you could have just passed, never mind. And like you said, most people are going to come down to that 4th and 1 draw that Penn State had. But
4th and 5.
4th and 5.
Remember, it wasn't 4th and 1. It was a 4th and 5. And I just want to jump in and I want to say, even if they pass and it's incomplete,
you're in the same situation.
You're in the same situation. So again, it's one of those situations, and I've said it before, if it works, you're golden. If it doesn't, everyone hates you. So it doesn't work either way, because if it was a pass, they would have found a way to say, well, he wasn't open. This guy over here was open. What kind of pass is that? Blah, blah, blah. They should have just run it. They would come and say something like that. But with Trace McSorley, the type of player that he is, the type of game he was having, you put the ball into your quarterback's hands, as many people have mentioned, as Dan Patrick was mentioning this morning, is the fact that at the end of the day, you want the ball in the hands of someone like a Kobe when Kobe was playing, LeBron, Magic when he was playing. Those are the types of guys you want to have you want them to have the ball. You want Trace McSorley to have the ball. He is the guy on your team who's going to win the game for you. And it was taken out of his hands, and that's the most unfortunate part about it.
It'd be like if Nick Saban in Alabama said, hey, Tua, I know you're doing great right now, but we're going to give it to Damian Harris to win us the game. All right? We're going to give it to Damian Harris instead of just putting the ball in Tua and his hands to win a game. Or if Ohio State was like, hey, we got all these playmakers, Haskins, we're not going to make you win us the game. So, I mean, that's what I think you're correct in that. For me, I am going to go with this team at the beginning of the year probably was not a dark horse, but because of what happened to them on September 22nd, could now turn into a dark horse. And this is kind of my going from least, they don't have that great of odds, that's why they're a dark horse, Virginia Tech. And the reason why I say that is watching this week at Duke, I was watching the game going, well, you know what? When I doubt Virginia Tech, they go out there and play well. When I don't doubt them, they go out and lose to Old Dominion. But what they got from Ryan Willis, if they could get that and he can do similar things, about 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, no INTs, this is a team where I look at the rest of their schedule, Notre Dame this week, which is going to be a big one, and I believe that one is at home for Virginia Tech. They get a big game there. They still get a game later in the year against Miami, and if they do well in the ACC, could still get into the ACC title game where they would most likely play Clemson, who could be a top 4 team. So for me, Virginia Tech is just one that I put there for a dark horse because you look at their schedule and who they could play if they play well is if you beat Notre Dame, that's one to put on the resume. You beat Miami, you get a chance to play Clemson. And if you beat Clemson with wins over an undefeated Notre Dame and what many people are thinking is an undefeated Clemson team, Virginia Tech could be one of those teams that plays themselves into the college football playoff. The only question is, and this is why they're the true dark horse, is can their backup quarterback, Ryan Willis, give them that chance and play well enough to give them the chance to be a playoff team?
Well, I think that's the thing. You know, with Virginia Tech, they have that big loss to Old Dominion, and then a lot of people don't have any faith in them against Duke. And I was one of those people, and you too were one of those people because you picked the Blue Devils. But I think Virginia Tech, what they need to do now, what is a must, is they have to win the rest of their games. They have to be able to do that. And if they cannot do that, they do not have any hope because they will not be the team coming out of the ACC. If there's going to be one team coming out of the ACC, it will be Clemson, and especially for what Clemson showed this past week. And no, they weren't playing an Alabama team, but they were playing a much improved, very competitive Syracuse team. So Virginia Tech has to get back on the map and show that, hey, we're still alive here in the ACC. We may need a crutch or two, but we are still alive over here. And if they don't do that, they are going to be in very big trouble, which is why, like I said, they need to be able to win every single game here on out. And for them to really, to their credit, they would need to be able to do that pretty convincingly, like big wins, blowout wins, to have someone then go and say, well, look at this Virginia Tech team. They're not only winning these games, they are blowing these teams out. That's how they need to be able to do it.
And the one thing that helps them is the team on the opposite side of them in their division in Miami only has one ranked opponent, I believe, on their schedule. And right now, that is the 24 or 25th ranked VT Hokies. Who's your next team? You said that you already gave the first one. Go ahead.
One thing I wanted to say and get to is that after this past weekend, chance to send a team to the college football playoff, the SEC right now, 97%, obviously. With them sending multiple teams, 39%. The Big Ten at 86%, multiple teams, 14%. The ACC, 60%. For multiple teams, a 0.6% chance. So they are not getting 2 teams. That is certain. So that's why it's even more important for Virginia Tech to get themselves back on the map and get playing some good football because Clemson seems like they are going to continue to do that as well. And the Pac-12 is way down, and even the percentage for themselves at 16% with the Big 12, then at 40%, and Notre Dame at 47%.
I like that
to reach the college playoff.
I find it funny that Notre Dame right now has a better chance to make the playoff than two entire conferences, the Big 12 and the Pac-12. Like, and I know that's because Stanford lost to them, and Stanford was like, after USC got knocked down, it's like, okay, Stanford's one of the only hopes for the Pac-12 now, and then they lose to Notre Dame. The Big 12, like I said, even an undefeated Oklahoma might miss the playoffs, and why they could be considered dark horses, like you said. But I look at that and I find it funny that Notre Dame has a better chance right now to make the playoffs than two complete conferences.
No, I love it. I think it's hysterical, but I think it also goes and speaks to kind of where the Pac-12 is right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, when Notre Dame beat Stanford, I think that dropped their chances significantly. And when Washington lost to Auburn, mm-hmm. It didn't drop them significantly then, but it did take a little bit of a hit. But certainly with Notre Dame beating Stanford, that hurt. With USC's lack of success this season, that's hurt them as well. So the Pac-12, they continue to be the least powerful of the Power 5 conferences, that's for sure.
Who's your next dark horse team?
Yeah, getting into my next one, I am keeping it in the Big 12 with the Mountaineers of West Virginia. They have been really good. I mean, if you look at their offense, which I did, I mean, certainly over this weekend I was able to catch some of their game too. I was flipping between their game and with the Red Raiders, and then the Clemson game with Syracuse. And seeing Will Grier and the throws that he's making, he is looking so confident. He's making throws that an NFL quarterback would be making. And who would have thought that when Will Grier was at Florida? Everyone wanted Will Grier to never reach the light of day for another game for Florida, let alone be someone who could make it to the NFL. But this West Virginia team is very good offensively. Defensively, they still have some work to do. They were up 35-10 for a good part of the game, and the final score was 42-34. But when it mattered, they had a huge interception return for a touchdown. That was Keith Washington, who picked off Jet Duffy, who was the backup who came in because the starting quarterback, Alan Bowman, got hurt. Actually, a collapsed lung. He's still in the hospital, which, prayers for him that he'll be okay in a speedy recovery. But I think you look at this game, and when they needed it, West Virginia did get their defense, and certainly their offense was good throughout the day. They only had one sack on the day, but this was a team overall that you look at and you think, I wouldn't want to face them, because while their defense may not be phenomenal, they did have enough to win in a very, very big, high scoring clash between two teams that can really put up a lot of points, as we've seen historically. But they did enough, and this offense is just scary, because if you put this offense up, and they will be put up against Texas, they will be put up against TCU, they will be put up against Oklahoma to end the season. So it's going to come down to the very end, and I think we're going to be looking at West Virginia and Oklahoma being the two teams that fight it out. And I don't want to throw Texas to the wind. I don't want to do that. But right now, I don't know if Texas has enough offense to compete with these two teams. They're a good team, and while Texas is very good, I think that they're almost too balanced, Ricky, whereas a West Virginia team or an Oklahoma team, they're just going to put up so many points on you, you're not going to be able to come back from it.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that I look at, too, is, I kind of mentioned this when you brought up Oklahoma, is I could see West Virginia being an undefeated team this season, beating Oklahoma. Not saying that would be my pick, but I could see it happening, and then them not making the playoff because the committee favors a one-loss Georgia or a one-loss Alabama team over them. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Big 12, because there's an obvious favorite, as you brought up the graphic with 97% that the SEC sends one team, that it's a 39, like the SEC has their percentage to send multiple teams is only 8% below Notre Dame, and they're just one team. So, I mean, take that into consideration, that the SEC almost has a similar percentage to send two teams that one independent team has to make the playoffs themselves. And, I mean, that's the kind of situation that I think we're in with the Big 12. And, like, for me, I kind of move over into that SEC, which there's some teams in that conference that could play spoiler. LSU, one we've talked about in the past, they're right now at number 5. Auburn, who will get that same chance to play LSU and Alabama later this year. I believe Auburn also plays Georgia as well. But a team I am looking at, and they're a team that this past week got a good win over South Carolina after upsetting Mississippi State 28-7 just 2 weeks ago. I'm looking at the Kentucky Wildcats as a true dark horse in that conference because, yes,
and
they don't.
I was right there with you. I had the same
Did
thinking.
you?
They were going to be my third one. I'm not lying to you. They were going to be. They were absolutely going to be one of mine, and I am interested to hear the reasons you give because I'll certainly chime in.
Well, I mean, for me, it's yes, they don't play Auburn. They don't play LSU. They're not playing the Auburn, Alabama, LSU. I almost said Oklahoma, and I'm like, they're not in the SEC. But the thing I look at with Kentucky is, for me, they can beat, like, Texas A&M will be a tough opponent at Texas A&M in College Station, but they could win that game. They can beat Vanderbilt. They can beat Mizzou. They can beat Tennessee. For me, the big game comes down to is can this team host Georgia on November 2nd and upset the Georgia Bulldogs? If this team upsets Georgia and takes care of business in all the other games, I think that Kentucky could be a team that we talk about as like a, holy crap, Georgia didn't make the SEC title game, and Georgia could have the Alabama syndrome of last year where they lose, they're not in the SEC title game. If, let's say, Alabama wins the title game, then there's a decision to make. But I look at Kentucky and I go, with how they've played, with the opponents that they have, if they take care of business and then shock the world at the first weekend of November, this could be a team that could be a true dark horse in the SEC.
I think you're right. I think you're right there. And I think that one of the things is, excuse me, if you look at the last 2 weeks, they've allowed just 17 points combined to teams like Mississippi State and South Carolina, two teams that a lot of people believed would be very, very good this season in the SEC. And as we now have seen, Mississippi State is 3-2 and South Carolina is 2-2, while Kentucky, someone that really I don't think many people were talking about, is 5-0. Kentucky's defense lately has been getting it done, and they've been providing plenty of offense to be able to do that too. And also, the next big game is not the Georgia game. The next big game is going to be this weekend on the road at Texas A&M. But if you look, Texas A&M just barely beat an Arkansas team that has been horrific all season long. So Texas A&M is not necessarily sitting pretty in this one, even with the game being at home, because we saw what Kentucky did when they went into Florida. And Florida, a team that I think thought that they had that game in the bag before the game even got kicked off. And Kentucky won 27-16. This Kentucky Wildcat team is a true dark horse just for this season. No one saw them coming at all to be 5-0, to beat Florida, to beat Mississippi State. I think that right now, Kentucky, they have the upper hand. They're playing, I think, better football, and they're hot. And you always have to be scared of a team that's hot. Now, at the quarterback position, there's nothing really special going on there in terms of what's happening, because Terry Wilson, just shy of 600 yards on the season, only 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions through the air, 3 rushing touchdowns. to add to that as well. But where Kentucky really has been getting it done is on the ground with Benny Snell Jr. 115 carries, 639 yards, and 8 touchdowns. This guy has really been providing a great boost so far this year for Kentucky. 3 out of his 5 games, he's had 100 yards or more, and it could have been 4 out of the 5 games because he had 99 yards against South Carolina, but 175 on the ground against Florida without a touchdown. He's also scored in 4 out of the 5 games. He has been providing them such a luxury from that running back position. He's been outstanding. And if he's continuing to have that type of success against Texas A&M and for the rest of the season, I'm serious. Watch out for this Kentucky team.
Now, you said that was going to be your third one, so I'll go ahead and give my last one, my third one. And this, to me, out of all 3 of the teams, this is why I left them for last, the ultimate dark horse. Like, there are dark horses, and then there is this team. And for me,
are you going to make me mad with this? I
might, just by mentioning their name, but the reason why they're a dark horse is because I don't think there will be ever a world, even though I would love to see it, there will ever be a world that the UCF Golden Knights make the college football playoff. And the reason why I bring them up as a dark horse is because the college football executive director, Bill Hancock, was actually asked about this at Thursday when he attended the North Carolina-Miami game in Miami. And he was asked about, could there be a path for the Golden Knights to be in the college football playoff? And here's his quote. He said, "Yes, there is a path. UCF got full consideration from the committee last year. I believe the committee at the end of the season had ranked UCF higher than the sports writers and the coaches had. So they got every consideration, and they had a wonderful season." He later on said, "For the path, play a good schedule, win your games, and you're going to be in the hunt for the college football playoff." And one of the things that people have come out and said is about the schedule. So far, they've played UConn, South Carolina State, North Carolina that got canceled. You have FAU and Pittsburgh. Coming up, they have SMU, Memphis, East Carolina, Temple, Navy, Cincinnati, and then South Florida. And one of those people who have said their schedule is just not tough enough is Paul Feinbaum. Is there a world in your mind, Brandon, where an undefeated UCF team makes the playoffs? Because last year, they finished the AP Top 25 as the 6th team in the country.
Ricky, their schedule last season was more difficult, and they finished the number 6 team in the country. This team, as you just said, this team this year is facing a much less difficult schedule. There is nobody on that schedule. Mm-hmm. No one ranked, not one ranked team as of right now, not one ranked team that they would be playing. Not one. Ricky, this schedule is so soft in terms of what the committee would want to look at and see, okay, well, should they be in the college football playoff? No, they shouldn't be because of that. While they're not a bad team, I mean, if you win all your games, you're not bad, but are you good enough to be in the college football playoff discussion? I don't think so. I mean, it seemed like an Ohio State who wins all of their games. Yeah, they're good enough to be in that discussion. They're certainly good enough. I mean, look at their schedule, look at the teams that they've played, and look at the scores that they've played too in the tough games that they've had to endure as well. Like that Penn State game, that was a tough game that they had to be able to endure. There's been no tough game that UCF is having to endure at all. And now people would say, well, you shouldn't knock a team for being so much better. Well, then UCF should probably find themselves a new conference. I mean, if UCF, I mean, they could probably go and be the best team in the Pac-12. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that would be hard to do. But there's no way that the UCF Golden Knights, the UCF Knights, and not Golden, but the UCF Knights should be anywhere near the college football playoff. Nowhere near it. Well, give them a good bowl game, award them in that way, but nowhere near deserving of the biggest honor in college football. There's just no way. It would be senseless to allow that to happen.
Well, and the thing that I'm going to kind of bring up is when it comes to UCF and those smaller teams, it basically, I look at it and there are some teams where it might be hard for a team like UCF to schedule even a non-conference game against a ranked foe, because there are many teams fighting for a playoff spot, and if there's even a question that UCF can upset me and I'm like the, let's say, 20th ranked team in the country, let's say I was VT coming into this season, no way am I scheduling you, because I am not helping you. Like, there's too much risk to outweigh the reward for that. And like, I look into the future ball where the out of conference schedule that they will have next year, they will actually have Stanford on the schedule, which is going to be a shocker. Like September 14th of 2019, they'll play Stanford. They get Houston again. But other than that, they're playing similar teams that they played this year. 2020, you get Georgia Tech, but I mean, Georgia Tech this year isn't a ranked Power 5 team. 2021, you're at Louisville, but we don't even know. Like, that's way too far down the line. 2021 and 22, they're playing Louisville, but we don't know if Louisville is going to be even the same team, because like I said, that's 4 or 5 years, or I'm sorry, 3 or 4 years down the line. But that's another challenge, because one thing I saw, I know this is college basketball, but I wanted to bring this up. I read an article today that like the Power 5 teams, or the like teams that are higher than Loyola's conference, are not scheduling. Like, Loyola is like, hey, we'll play you for a game in non-conference season. They'll be like, no way, we don't want to play you, because there's so much risk to, if they lose a game against a non-Power 5 team early in the year, where it's like, hey, you know what, one loss could kill us in the college football playoff, even though we've seen one-loss teams get in. Do you have any final thoughts or final anything you want to say before we move on into our next topic?
Well, UCF, they're in a difficult situation, and you mentioned it, especially after last year. What teams are going to look at them and say, yeah, sure, we'll play you? You know, what team like an Alabama or a Clemson necessarily wants to put them on their schedule, because they don't want to blemish it any more than what might happen with a team like this that has played extremely well. But at the same time, I mean, I don't necessarily want to change the system. You know, we had it for a long time with the BCS, and now we have the playoff format as it is right now. I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong or broken with it. There's always, as I said last year, there's always going to be snubs. There's always going to be people that aren't happy with what happens at the end of the season. There always is going to be. That is never going away. And if we say, let's expand it to 8, you still have the same problem. Let's expand it to 12, same problem. The same thing happens, and I've repeated this before, the same thing happens when you have 68 teams competing in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Same thing happens there. You always have a snub. That is not going to go away. There's always going to be a team or multiple teams that believe they played extremely well to get to that point to not be in it. And I don't think, I mean, you can expand it to 8 teams. I don't think UCF is going to be one of those 8 teams. I don't think that would happen. There's so many better teams with better schedules playing better football. And I'm not saying that they're not playing good football, but it's nowhere near the talent level of these other teams. I would love to see them go up against an Oklahoma. I would love to see them go up against an Alabama, a Clemson, a Georgia, an Ohio State, all of those top teams, so that everyone who is a UCF needs to be in the playoff format cheerleader. Exactly what happens. And for those of us who are a UCF should be nowhere near the playoff format, we can see what happens as well. But that's not going to happen. I wish it would, so we could see it. Just to have those games. I'm not saying to put them in the playoffs. I'm saying to have those games throughout the season. But for the foreseeable future, that is not going to be the case. That is not going to happen. And they're still going to continue to be in this position. And knowing UCF, they're still going to continue to pretend like they win.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, the big thing is there's no perfect system. Where part of me feels like the Boise States from years ago, the UCFs now, part of me wants to give them a chance because it's like, hey, you know what? Going undefeated is no task that, oh, well, your schedule was easy, so we're not going to look at your undefeated season. But really, it's you want to play tougher opponents. Opponents aren't going to risk their playoff chances on playing you, and right now it's just that sticky situation. Maybe in 2021, 2022, things change. If maybe Louisville's a better team and they're ranked at that time and things change there. But let us know
I will say this one final thing is if it got to the point where teams were playing each other and you had, let's say, two losses from an Ohio State. I'm just throwing things out there crazily. Two losses from an Ohio State. Two losses from a Oklahoma or something like that, where these teams, they've found a way to have multiple losses, and you still have, let's say, an Alabama and a Clemson with no losses, and then you have your UCF sitting there perfectly. That's when, if you have no one loss and everyone after that is two losses, and UCF is up there sitting at 5, maybe 6. That's when maybe you say, okay, do we want to be fair about this, or do we just want to put the teams that have always been in it? Now, I don't think that would have been the case last year because UCF was at 13 at the time. They weren't anywhere close to be able to do it. There were teams in front of them that still deserved it more. I mean, I don't think that there'd be too many people who would argue that point. But I will say, if that scenario ever happened, where you had multiple lost teams, and then them sitting there at a 6, at a 5, because they were 13-0 or 12-0, that's when maybe someone starts to say, because UCF is right over here, let's just do it. Let's just put them in. They're clearly, an undefeated team. They have maybe not the best schedule, but they have no losses. This team has 2 losses, not 1, 2. So maybe we should put them in because they're not far enough back where we could get away saying, they were 13. We couldn't jump them in front of all these teams, but they were 6. They were 5. Something like that. I don't know if that would ever happen. But at that point, you almost have to say, well, we can't really push it off much longer. We kind of have to put it in.
And before we wrap it up, just to put it in perspective, this year UCF started the preseason ranked 21st, and now they're ranked 12th, I believe, in the rankings this week.
Yes.
Last year, they were unranked, obviously, because I believe they went 0-12 the year before Scott Frost, but they were unranked at the beginning of last season. By this time last year, they were just cracking into the top 25 at 25. So you have a little bit of a higher starting ground to start on after 6 weeks of the college football season compared to last week when you were dead last in the rankings at 25 or at 25. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think. Who are your dark horses? Do you believe with some of our dark horses? Do you think that they are true dark horses? What do you guys think for the college football playoff? Who is going to be dark horses and who could upset the status quo at the top of the rankings?